The grass is greenest where it's watered. Jackson awoke in the dead of the night. A loud commotion was coming from his parents' room. He got out of bed, walked to the door, and pressed his ear up against it. Sounds of anger and pain entered his innocent ear. He dropped to his knees, so overwhelmed by the pain of his father's voice. They had been fighting for a while. His parents tried to keep it quiet, yelling with their inside voices not to wake the family. But Jackson, awake and alert, could hear every word of pain and misery. "Why don't you love me anymore?" He crawled back to his bed, distraught. How can I help? He pulled the pillow behind his head and over his ears to not let any sounds in. He began to sink within himself. He was swallowed in a deep despair. He felt paralyzed, stuck, sinking further and further and further into a depth that only sorrow could take him. He closed his eyes and hoped somehow he wouldn't wake up. He couldn't shake all those awful sounds from his head. All the pain, all the hurt echoed inside him. Jackson felt his body land in a sea of darkness. The ground was underneath him once again. He laid there, drawing his arms and legs towards his body, his limbs being his only comfort as he wept. A bright blue light was dancing in the air. What is that? He was mesmerized by it as it flew towards him. Jackson held out his hand and made a perfect landing pad for the small blue feathered fairy. "Hello," said Jackson. "Jackson, my name's Wren," said the bluebird. "A talking bird? I must be dreaming." "How do you know my name?" said Jackson. "Never mind how I know you. I know more than you imagine. I know that what's troubling you. I have to get back to my parents. They need me. They are fighting. They don't love each other anymore." Tears welled inside his eyes, one drop escaping down his red-flustered cheek. "I've seen them fighting for some time," said the fairy wren. "It's so common today. Follow me this way." Wren flew through the darkness with Jackson close behind. A light appeared in the distance. It was a hole to the surface. "Jackson, what you want, you'll find through this hole. You'll meet a man up there. He'll help you." Jackson wiped his eyes, put on a brave face, and climbed through the hole. Following the light above, he made it to the other side and found it was a hole in a tree. He entered this new world, and he was surrounded by a variety of every tree imaginable. There were trees of every shape, every size, but none of them alive. Some were burned to a crisp. Some were stunted, never growing higher than a foot. Some were chopped only stumps, some rotting from the inside or chewed up by termites. He walked through a path in the dead forest. So many trees, so little shade, no flowers, no fruits. What happened here, he wondered. The walk through the dead forest was long. The only company he had were crows. He missed his little blue friend. He saw a green hill far away with a tall white tree growing on it. He approached the patch of green with caution. The blades of grass were pristine, almost perfect. Jackson ran his hands through the grass to feel the life inside of it. He looked up to the base of an old gum tree. The trunk was white, smooth, and strong. The tree spread its branches like outstretched arms, swaying in the gentle breeze. Flexible, but not unyielding. The branches formed fractals, their patterns repeating as they got smaller and smaller, rising to the sky. Small blossoms sprouted against the bright green leaves. Jackson could see what he was missing. He laid on his back in the soft grass, consumed by not only his pain, but the pain of his parents. Tears welled in his eyes once again. He came from them. He was connected to them. He had to help them. Jackson opened his weary eyes. He looked through the branches to the sky above him. He thought he saw two eyes, two big black eyes staring back at him. It was a koala sitting in a gum tree. The koala climbed down from the tree, marched his tiny feet, and shuffled towards Jackson. The koala jumped in his arms and wrapped his strong paws around his neck. They snuggled for a moment, the koala letting Jackson know he wasn't alone. "Jackson," a deep voice said from behind him. Jackson turned to see a tall man, holding a shovel and water bucket. He was an imposing figure, a strong face and stern eyes, but there was a gentleness about him. "Don't be frightened, Jackson. I've been expecting you. I hear from a little fairy that not all is well at home." "No," said Jackson. "No, it's not well. Mom and Dad are fighting. I have to help them." "I know, son. I've seen it all before. You see, Jackson, those trees you saw were once as great as this gum tree. There were koalas all around. Flowers blossomed from the branches. But the grass isn't always greener on the other side. The grass is greenest where it's watered. Some take time to tend to it. Some cannot be bothered. The seeds are soft and fragile. The trees need constant care. When that tree gets no attention, the branches become bare. No more koalas in its branches. No more birds that come to nest. With trees there's so few chances, so give it water, that is best." Jackson began to cry. "Can the trees go strong again?" "They can," said the old man, "they can. They can blossom even more so than before. But it does take work. Let me show you something, Jackson. Take my hand." Jackson was hesitant at first, but there was something in that man's eyes he trusted. He was transported in his mind with the old man at his side. He could see a scene unfolding. Two people hand in hand with beaming smiles. They were clothed in a radiant white, with family and friends around them. Jackson knew the faces. It was his parents. "Those are my parents," he exclaimed. He hadn't seen them so happy before. "What is going on there? Why are they smiling?" he said. The old man with his big blue eyes turned to the boy. "Jackson, this is how it always begins. They love each other very much. They want to be together forever. But as you know, that love doesn't always grow. At times it withers, and at times it splinters, and it seems it's dying slow. Life gets the best of people sometimes, and couples must be strong. There are many forces that will try to come between you, that bond you see down there. That's why the tree must always be watered, the grass tended with care. Otherwise it ends up with nothing, branches growing bare." It was time to go. They couldn't stay there forever. Jackson cherished the moment, his mother's smile, the tear from his father's eye, the way they held one another's hand in a fragile and sacred bond. He took the old man by the hand, and they walked away from the scene. He was transported back to that beautiful patch of grass beside the great white gum tree. "Jackson, it's time for you to go back now," said the man. "I know, I can't stay here forever. I'm afraid to go back, though. I don't want to see my parents fighting. I want them to love each other." "Jackson, I know you want that. We all want that for our families. Don't forget that life gets in the way sometimes. It can get the best of us. But you need to be strong. As bad as it is for you, imagine what your parents are going through right now. Shattered dreams, shattered plans." A blue wren flew through the dead trees toward Jackson and the old man. His bright blue glow could be seen in the distance. "It's Wren! He's coming! Yes, there he is. Wren will take you back home." Wren landed on his shoulder, saying, "Hello. Don't worry, Jackson. We'll get you home safe." Jackson dropped down to give the koala one last hug. He squeezed the little fur ball as tight as he could. He looked up to the old man and said, "Thank you for teaching me." "You're welcome, Jackson. Now run along now and remember what I told you." Wren led the way, darting and dashing back and forth between the struggling trees. Jackson saw green shoots rising from the soil here and there. It gave him hope. He ran and ran, trying his best to keep up with the wren, without running into a tree. They stopped at a giant tree, an old dead tree that once was mighty. Jackson wondered what brought it down. It had a large opening near the roots. "Time to go, Jackson. In you get." Jackson was hesitant, but he had seen it all by now and was ready. The hole was dark and looked dubious. He paused for a moment. "Will I see you again, Wren?" "I don't know, Jackson. We may just run into each other in the future." Jackson smiled and entered the dark hole in the tree. Jackson heard a thud from the neighboring room, followed by the hushed rage. He didn't cry this time. Memories flashed in his mind of the happier times, his mother's smile, his father's happy tears, and their hands in a warm embrace. He got up from his bed, walked to the door, he cracked it open, and the hushed rage grew louder. He walked slowly towards the door to his parents' room. He didn't knock. The sounds grew louder and louder with each step. He was frightened but kept going. He reached the door, just meters away from the pain and anger of years of hurt, pain, distrust, anger, frustration, sorrow, and betrayal. Jackson placed his hand on the doorknob, turned the knob slowly, and opened the door. The light from the room illuminated the darkness around him. His parents couldn't hide their pain anymore. He looked up at their faces. Their cheeks were red with rage. Their bodies had a slight droop from the weight they carried. Their eyes were wet with years of missed opportunities and second chances betrayed. They were a mess. His parents sank to the edge of the bed as they saw the tears in the eyes of their boy. He stood there, tall and strong, like a boy many years beyond his age. Jackson's mouth turned down as his jaw slightly trembled. His eyes remained strong and certain, yet tearful. His parents had their heads in their hands, and a distance between them that seemed to go greater and greater year by year. Jackson slowly walked towards them, standing over them for a brief moment as their heads stayed low. His parents cried and cried. Jackson could feel it in his soul. He dropped to his knees and put his arms around their waists. He drew them near to him and to each other, closing the distance between them. His parents put one hand around their son and held him tight. They cried and cried, but did not wail. The anger was lifting from the room, their sorrow purging between them as they bore the pain as a family. With their heads buried in each other, arms wrapped around Jackson, they each extended an arm towards the other, resting their hands on one another's backs. It was the first time they had had an affectionate touch in a long, long time. The two parents held quiet, their anger, rage, and torment dammed by the powers of a little boy. No words were said. Tears fell from Jackson's parents like waterfalls of sorrow. Jackson felt the droplets land on the crown of his head. In the quiet of the night, as the three embraced, Jackson's youngest sister, emboldened by the strength of her brother, entered the lair of torment and wrapped her tiny hands around her family. Tears flowed even greater from his parents' eyes. For the first time in too long, Jackson's parents began to see outside themselves. They began to see the world in a different light. How they felt, how they believed, how they hurt and experienced was secondary to what was most important. A great white flag of surrender came rushing into that room in the form of a little boy, brave and true. A boy brave enough to face his greatest fear and worry. Many years later, Jackson sat outside his front porch, watching as his children played in the yard. The grass was a luscious green, well maintained and cared for. He watered it as often as he could spare. A tall gum tree grew in his yard, vast and white with growing branches up to the sky, where the blue fairy wrens were nesting for spring, and flowers blossomed from the outstretched branches. Jackson was a happy man.